This is a video about the super keyword in Python. So you've probably seen a keyword that looks like that, super dot double score init, and you probably want to put something here, some arguments. So what's the benefit of this keyword? Well, this is something that is used in object-oriented programming in Python. So to explain how this works, or what is the benefit of this keyword in what problem it does solve exactly, let's just create two classes. The first is a superclass, let's call it employee, and the other class is a subclass called engineer. And what I want to do is to inherit the attributes of this superclass employee. So to do that, I just put the word employee inside the parentheses, right? So now let's define an initialization method for this class, diff init parentheses self, and let's just print something here. Employee is init method has been printed. Now let's do the same thing here for the engineers class. And this time I will replace this with engineer. Now let's try and create an instance of this subclass engineer. So I can just type engineer1 equal engineer. That's it, and run the code. So what happens is that I get this statement printed out. So the reason why I wrote this code is to show you that when the subclass has its own initialization method, it gets executed instead of the initialization method of the parent class. Otherwise, if I don't have this statement here and I just type pass, then what would be printed is rather this statement here. You see, I got this statement printed out. So this is important to understand the keyword super, and I will show you why in a moment. So now let's say we want to define a name for our employee. So for that reason I will just type in an argument called name, and I want to define an attribute called name using that name. Just to avoid confusion, let's type this in. Let's capitalize name. Now the attribute is this thing here, name. So the class engineer should normally inherit this attribute name because it's inheriting the superclass employee. So now I can, for example, give a name to my engineer. But this won't work because what gets executed when creating a class or the subclass engineer is this initialization method rather than this method. So this thing here would work if I don't have an initialization method here. So this works, but in that case it doesn't work. So how to solve this problem? So how to give an attribute called name to my engineer? Well, the most straightforward way is just to type in name here and create an attribute called name for my engineer. So now this would work, and let's just print out the name of myEngineer1. You see that this works, but this is not the best way to do it. This is not the right way to do it for two reasons. The first reason is that this attribute name is not inherited from this employee. It's rather created inside of this subclass. And the other reason is sometimes this attribute name can be used in some other process. For example, it can be used to create an email. For example, I can create an email with this attribute. I can just type in self.name plus @gmail.com. So now let's try and run this to see if everything is going well. Well, everything is going well. Now, the name of my engineer is printed out here, but if I want to print the mail of engineer1, this won't work. You see, because we are not inheriting this name. This is not inherited. This is just rather created. So if we inherit the attribute name from the employee, then we would be able to create an email automatically. So how do we do that? Well, we do that with the super initialization method. So what I need to do is just to delete this and write here the keyword super dot double underscores and double underscores, and here I define the attribute I want. So I can define here, I can pass here name. And this name would be nothing but this name that it would have passed here. So now let's define again an instance of the engineers class, and let's try to get the mail of the engineer. It's rather email. So you can see that I've got successfully the email for my engineer class, for my eng1 object, despite not defining any email attribute here. And the reason is because this super keyword here calls the initialization method from the superclass. So what happens here when I created an instance of the engineer subclass is that the execution at a given point at line 10 called this initialization method, the initialization method of the superclass, and it passed the argument name to it. As a result, the attribute name was created, and the attribute email was also created, and this is the reason why I got successfully the attribute email. And this is the reason why we use the super keyword in classes in Python.